Okay, we're live. You have the link?
Yeah, I'm just opening it. Then I'm gonna share it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
There we go. Let's see who's the first one in today. There's a race now to be the first one to log in.
Where there's somebody already watching now.
MashaAllah. Let's see who's the first one in. Welcome, fam. Alhamdulillah. How you doing?
No, not yet.
Not yet. I'm live, but we're about to start, inshallah.
What?
لا إله إلا الله.
Abdul.
Yeah, we're already live. طيب, so we're going to continue today from Bab Tayammum, huh?
نعم باب التيمم.
Bab Tayammum, and then there is the next chapter after that is
باب الحيض.
Bab al-Hayd. These are two short chapters, and that will take us to Kitab al-Salah, inshallah, from there.
إن شاء الله.
Oh, did I share the screen? Let me share the screen.
No. Share the screen.
Okay, here we go. Let me know if you guys see the screen share. Okay, perfect. Alaikum
Yeah.
salam rahmatullah.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله بعد. Go ahead.
1 second.
نعم.
طيب. بسم الله. باب التيمم إن شاء الله. نعم, go ahead. Real quick, I'm sorry. Since we're starting tayammum, what is tayammum, first of all? Tayammum, literally tayammum means qasd, to intend. That's the literal meaning of tayammum. The literal meaning of tayammum is to intend something. Okay, technically, the word tayammum is used for مسح الوجه واليدين من الصعيد الطيب بدلا من طهارة الماء. So tayammum is to wipe the face and the two hands with الصعيد الطيب, which is the pure earth, in place of water, in place of the tahara that's normally done with water. So that's the technical definition of tayammum, to wipe the hands and the face with the pure earth, and we'll go into the details, of course, in place of water, meaning somebody doesn't have water, so they use the pure earth as a means of purifying oneself instead of water. Okay. Also, tayammum is actually from the khasa'is of this ummah. It's something that this ummah was singled out with. It was something that wasn't revealed before the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So they didn't have something like tayammum in place of wudu, in place of ablution in the previous nations. This was something that was specific to this ummah. As far as the pure earth, that means anything that comes from the earth. It can be dust, mud, rocks, sand, clay. Anything that comes from the actual earth itself can be used for tayammum. And if needed, rocks and bricks and things like that, the ulama, they said if needed. Okay, the preference is given to something that is from the earth, specifically like the dust and the mud and sand and things like that. And then something that's made of something that came from the earth, like clay or a rock or a brick, is permissible if that's what we have access to. Okay. طيب, go ahead inshallah with the first hadith.
نعم. عن عمران بن حسين رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم رأى رجلا معتزلا لم يصلي في القوم فقال يا فلان ما منعك أن تصلي في القوم فقال يا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أصابتني جنابة ولا ماء فقال عليك بالصعيد فإنه يكفيك. نعم.
جميل. So the hadith عن عمران ibn Husayn. Imran ibn Hussein, he was one of the companions. He was one of the great companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was reported about him that the malaika used to give him salam. That the malaika used to say salam to him. Okay, so the hadith, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw a man mu'tazilan. Mu'tazilan. What is the meaning of mu'tazil?
معتزل is to be alone.
To be alone, to
اعتزال.
isolate oneself, right? To be alone. He saw a man isolating himself from the rest of the people. لم يصلي في القوم. He didn't pray with the rest of the people. لم يصلي في القوم. فقال يا فلان. He said, oh, so and so. فلان means that either the person's name is unknown or he didn't want to mention who the person's name was. So يا فلان ما منعك أن تصلي في القوم. The Prophet ﷺ asked him, what prevented you from praying with the people? فقال يا رسول الله أصابتني جنابة. He responded, I'm in a state of janaba, the greater impurity. I'm in a state of janaba, needing to make ghusl. ولا ماء, and there is no water. So he said, I'm in a state of janaba and there is no water available. So apparently he didn't know what to do. فقال عليك بالصعيد فإنه يكفيك. He said, upon you is as-sa'id, which means the pure earth. It will be sufficient for you. Okay, so that was the response of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, we can take from this hadith that of the sunnah is that if a person is not going to pray with a group of people that are praying, that they should remain away from the salah. It's not a good adab for a Muslim to be around a salah being established as a jama'ah and not to be part of the salah, to be sitting down near a jama'ah and not taking part with the jama'ah. So either a person, if they're in the presence of the jama'ah, they should join the jama'ah to receive the ajr and the blessings. And even if you prayed that prayer already, there's no harm in praying with the group, right? And this is the sunnah. And if they're not going to do that, then they should go somewhere else. You shouldn't remain amongst Salatul Jama'ah. It's like from the adab of the believer that Allah is being worshipped and we're not taking part in that worship. And how could it be we see people worshiping Allah and we're not taking part in that worship? Okay. In one narration, the Prophet ﷺ, he asked him, Alasta bi rajulun Muslim? Are you not a believer? Okay. Are you not a believer? Okay, so it was commonly known then amongst the Sahaba that if somebody was in the presence of prayer, that they would join the prayer. Okay, the scholars, they said there's one of two possibilities here. Either this man didn't know about tayammum at all, okay, or he didn't know that you can make tayammum from janaba. Okay, and this is the more likely issue, that he knew about tayammum because tayammum had been revealed before that time. The narrator of the hadith, Imran ibn Hussein, he didn't enter Islam until towards the end of Islam. He didn't enter Islam towards the end of the Madani period. So it's more likely that it wasn't that he didn't know about tayammum at all, but he didn't know that you could make tayammum from janaba. Okay? No. Okay, so the hadith obviously teaches us that tayammum applies to janaba as well. So you can make tayammum whether you are needing wudu, you can make tayammum, or even if you're in a state of janaba and there's no water available, you can make tayammum as well. Okay, so both of those are permissible. When there's no water, the dirt or soil will take the place of water in any situation as far as tahara, whether it be for wudu or it be for ghusl. Okay. نعم. Jamil, we can go on to the next hadith.
So, quick question though, just which is regarding tayammum. So a person, if he does tayammum, if he's in a state of janaba, then he later on finds water, it's better for him to go do ghusl then, or he doesn't have to ghusl?
So as for the details, so the thing is this: if a person makes tayammum in place of wudu or ghusl, and they pray with that tayammum, then that prayer is complete. Okay, so So he does not need to go back and repeat that prayer because water became available later on. Okay? So let's say, for example, Dhuhr came in and a person needed to pray. They made tayammum and prayed. Okay? And then within an hour, let's say, while it's still within the time of Dhuhr, water became available.
No.
Does the person need to go back now that water is available and repeat that prayer? The answer is no. You don't need to repeat that prayer. Okay? How? Because that prayer was correct. However, now the tahara that he's in is no longer valid. The tahara that was done with tayammum is no longer valid now. Once water becomes available, then the person needs to go ahead and make a normal wudu or ghusl. So tayammum only replaces the wudu or the ghusl as long as water is not available. Once water becomes available, then you have to make a normal tahara. Okay? The scholars, some went, into the details. They differed upon what if water becomes available during the act of worship. Okay? And it seems like the stronger view is that if it becomes available during the act of worship, to break the prayer and make wudu with water. Okay, so somebody made tayammum and started the salah, there's a difference of opinion. Then all of a sudden water became available. One way or another, the scholars differed. It seems that the strong in this situation is that they should break the prayer, make wudu, and then pray. Okay,
No.
but if the salah was finished and completed, then there's no need to go back and repeat it because that salah was correct.
No.
We have a question here. If someone has a cast covering most of his right foot for long term and he's 60 years old, does he just do tayammum? He can wipe over that part with water. Okay, so if that person should make a normal wudu on the rest of the limbs of the body and then wipe over the cast with water. Okay, just wipe, no need to wash, but just wipe over whichever part of the limb that's part of the wudu is covered with a cast. That part should be wiped over with water. Okay, so say I have a cast on that's covering this part of my wrist, for example, then I should wipe over that part with water and do a normal wudu on everything else, like a masih on that part. The rest of the wudu is normal and that part should be wiped over. Okay, if water harms it, if it can't be touched with water at all, then they can do a light masih or wipe with very little water. Okay, to the extent that it won't be affected. If they can't do that, then it would be permissible to do tayammum over that part. Okay, if water absolutely can't come near this part of the body for some reason at that time, then they can do a tayammum over that part of the body. Now, Allahu a'lam wa iyyakum. Now, go ahead, inshallah.
نعم. عن عمران بن ياسر رضي الله عنهما قال: بعثني النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في حاجة فأجنبت فلم أجد الماء فتمرغت في الصعيد كما تمرغ دابة ثم آتيت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فذكرت ذلك له فقال: إنما كان يكفيك أن تقول بيديك هكذا ثم ضرب بيديه الأرض ضربة واحدة ثم مسح الشمال على اليمين وظاهر كفيه ووجهه.
نعم. So the hadith عن عمار ibn Yasir. Ammar ibn Yasir was one of the first people to accept Islam. He's from Al Yasir, the family that was being tortured in Mecca during the early part of Islam. And his family members were the first shuhada, the first people that were killed for no other reason except for their faith. So Ammar ibn Yasir survived. He's from the first to accept Islam. And he lived for many years after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So Ammar, he says, قال بعثني النبي في حاجة. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam sent him out for a need, for a haja. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam sent him out to perform a task. فأجنبت. He entered a state of janaba. فلم أجد الماء. I couldn't find the water. So he says, فَتَمَرَّغْتُ فِي الصَّعِيدِ. So what did he do? He rolled around in the dirt. Okay? He actually took, he laid down on the ground and he rolled around in the dirt. And he didn't know the ruling. He didn't know what to do exactly. He knew he was in a state of janaba, so he rolled around in the dirt. Okay? Now notice here that what did he actually do? He actually made a qiyas, an analogy. Since when we're in a state of janaba, what would we do? We would wash our whole body, right? So he understood that I would wash my whole body. Therefore, if I'm using dirt in its place, I need to, cover my entire body, or dirt needs to touch my entire body. So this is a type of qiyas. What's interesting here is that those that reject qiyas, like the Zahiriyya, who reject qiyas altogether, they use narrations like this one. They will say, see, he made a qiyas and the qiyas was rejected. Therefore, there is no qiyas. You see? But this is not the case, because even though his qiyas was wrong in this situation, it doesn't mean that you can never have an analogy. Doesn't mean that there's never any analogy between different situations that applies. It just didn't apply in this situation. Okay? So he rolled around, كما تمرغ الدابة. He says, just as an animal would roll around in the dirt. ثم أتيت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. I came to the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم فذكرت ذلك له, and told him what had happened. فقال إنما يكفيك أن تقول بيديك هكذا. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم told him, it would have been sufficient for you to do as such with your hands. ثم ضرب بيديه الأرض ضربة واحدة. And the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم hit the ground with his hands, one hit, ضربة واحدة. So he touched his hands to the dirt one time with a little bit of force. الضربة, ضرب means to hit. So he hit it one time, ضربة واحدة. ثم مسح الشمال على اليمين. Then he wiped the left over the right. In other narrations, it's mentioned that he blew on his hands first. So he touched the ground until there was dust or dirt on them. He blew his hands off. Then he wiped the left over the right. Okay. ثم مسح الشمال على اليمين وظاهر كفيه ووجهه, and the rest of his hands, and then his face. Okay. So what did the Prophet ﷺ teach him to do? He taught him to hit the ground one time, blow over them, so you're not actually gonna get dirt and dust on your face. He blew over them. He wiped the left over the right, and then he wiped his face one time. That's tayammum. That's it. That's all it is. It's nothing more than that. Okay? It doesn't go beyond that, and we'll come to some details, but that's all you need to do to make tayammum. You get dirt on your hands one time, you wipe the left over the right, basically the two hands together, and then the face one time. Okay? That's how tayammum is made. Jameel?
No.
Before we move on, okay, so it's just one. The scholars, they differed as to one or two hits of the ground. Some of them said you hit once for the hands and you hit once again for the face. Okay, some said one, some said two. There are narrations that mention two. I believe Imam al-Shafi'i takes the view of two. However, they don't reach the authenticity of these narrations. So these narrations, when we have narrations coming from Bukhari and Muslim, these are the highest level of authenticity. They're more authentic than the ones. There's weakness in the narrations that mention darbatan, hitting the ground twice. So we would say that one time is sufficient for the hands and the face. You don't need to take more dust. One time is sufficient for the hands and the face. You were going to say, Abdul?
Now, I had a quick question regarding, because Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen, I remember Rahimahullah mentioned that when there's ikhtilaf, it's better to get out of the ikhtilaf. Wouldn't then it be better maybe just to do it twice then, do you think?
If there was ikhtilaf as to within the dalil, the understanding of the dalil,
No.
then yes. If the hadith didn't mention, didn't specify one or two, and the scholars differed between one or two, then we would say go with two. That gets you out of the khilaf.
No.
When we have a perfectly authentic narration that actually specifies one time, then we say it's best to stick to the authentic narration.
No. Barakallahu fikum.
Fikum barak. As far as the hands first or the face first, some of the scholars, they mentioned that when he says here in this hadith, he uses the wa, he cleaned his hands and his face with the term بيدك هكذا وضربة واحدة ثم مسح. No, but see this narration, some of the scholars, they said the face first and then the hands to follow the order of wudu. Okay, but this narration actually says ثم, meaning he wiped his hands ثم and then his face. Okay, so we would say that's the right way, the hands and then the face.
And then the
What's the difference between wa and thumma in Arabic? There's a difference between the two.
wa is and then thumma is after, or
Wa means and, but it doesn't specify order. Correct.
order.
If you said wa, then you're not specifying order. So if I said, for example, In'am entered, wa Francisco, wa Ibrahim, they could have came in the other order than the order that I mentioned. It just means and. But if you say thumma, if I say dakhala In'am entered, thumma Francisco, thumma Ibrahim, that means they came in that order. So when this narration uses the word thumma, it means that he claims that he wiped his hands and then his face. So we stick to that order, inshallah. Does the hand meaning the arm or just the hand? Yasin, it's just the hand. Okay, because the word that's mentioned in the hadith is yadayhi, his hands. Okay, and the word yad means hand. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran about the one who steals, right? فَقْطَعُوا مَاذا? أَيْدِيَهُمَا, cut their hand, right? It doesn't mean from the elbow. The word yad means just up to the wrist, the hand. So you just wipe over the hands. You don't go up to the elbow as in with the wudu. Okay. Also, one other fa'idah here, one other benefit we can take from this is that he did not tell him to repeat the prayer, right? This is a good fa'idah. Why? It's a good to understand this. He didn't tell him to repeat the prayer. The ulama, they use this to say that if somebody makes ijtihad, a person who's qualified to make ijtihad, yani he tries to attain the ruling, okay, but then makes a mistake based on his knowledge and the dalil that he knows and the proofs. He tries to reach the truth, but he makes a mistake. That person who made ijtihad does not need to repeat the act of worship. Okay, he's forgiven because he made ijtihad based on the knowledge that he has. If he's mistaken, he's forgiven for the mistake. Okay, so a mujtahid, a person who's qualified to make ijtihad, and he does so, turns out he's wrong, he doesn't need to repeat the act of worship because he made ijtihad. And as we know, the Prophet ﷺ said the one who makes the ijtihad and is correct, he has 2 rewards, and the one who makes ijtihad and was mistaken, then he only has 1 reward. But this is for a person who's qualified to make ijtihad, right? So if somebody doesn't have any knowledge of the issue whatsoever, then it's upon them to seek the knowledge and to ask, not just to do whatever they feel. Well, I'll just do this or that. No, this is for a person who has the knowledge, makes an ijtihad, then it turns out he was wrong. Okay? In that situation, he doesn't need to repeat the act of worship. No? Now, question.
The person who is not knowledgeable and he makes a mistake, does he have to repeat?
The person who's not knowledgeable, it was upon him to ask in the first place. And this is what's correct. He wasn't qualified to make ijtihad. So, yeah, so Allahu A'lam, if he found out shortly thereafter, he should repeat. No. Allahu A'lam. The next hadith, inshallah.
نعم. عن جابر بن عبد الله رضي الله عنهما أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: أعطيت 5 لم يعطهن أحد من الأنبياء قبلي، نصرت بالرعب مسيرة شهر، وجعلت للأرض مسجدا وطهورا، فأيما رجل من أمتي أدركته الصلاة فليصلي، وأحلت للمغانم ولم تحلل
لي المغانم
وأحلت
لي نعم
لي
لي المغانم أحلت لي المغانم
المغانم ولم تحلل is also same as we can
ولم تحل لأحد قبلي.
Okay. ولم تحل لأحد قبلي وأعطيت الشفاعة وكان النبي صلى وكان النبي يبعث إلى قومه خاصة وبعثت إلى الناس عامة. نعم.
The hadith عن جابر ibn Abdullah. Jabir was from the Ansar. Okay, Jabir ibn Abdullah أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال, this is a very interesting hadith. قال, the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said, أعطيت خمسا, I've been given 5. لم يعطهن أحد من الأنبياء قبلي. None of the prophets before me were given these 5. So these were 5 things that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم was specified with that were not given to a prophet before him. The first of them, نصرت بالرعب مسيرة شهر. I was given that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed fear in the hearts of my enemies from the distance of a month travel. Okay, so if they knew that the Prophet ﷺ was a month travel away from them, they would have fear in their hearts from that, if they were the enemies of Islam, right? And the ulama, they said this applies to the believers as well. So based on the level of iman of the believers, if there's an enemy that intended to attack the Muslims, based on the level of the iman and the preparedness of the believers, that same fear would be in the heart of the enemies. That's why we see the ummah, when it was in a period of strength and honor and izzah and khilafah, that the ummah was feared. People would not just simply attack the Muslims or part of the ummah here or there. But when the ummah weakens and there's no unity and there's discord, and then that fear in the heart of the enemies is no longer there. And Ibn al-Qayyim, he refers to the verse when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يَجْعَلُ اللَّهُ لِلْكَافِرِينَ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ سَبِيلًا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not allow for the disbelievers a path, a sabil, above the believers, to be in control of the believers. Ibn al-Qayyim, he says this is dependent upon the level of iman, because Allah says عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So based on the level of iman will be how much disbelievers can have control over the believers. When the iman is strong enough, the disbelievers will be prevented completely from having any control over the believers. Okay, so نعم لم يعطه نصرت بالرعب مسيرة شهر وجعلت لي الأرض مسجدا وطهورا. And the entire earth, وجعلت لي الأرض, the entire earth was made for me as a masjid and a place of tahara, وطهورا. Okay, so here the word the Prophet ﷺ saying is the entire earth was made for me as a masjid. Masjid here is the linguistic meaning of the word masjid. It doesn't mean that the entire earth is a masjid. It means that the entire earth is a place of sujood. Yes, meaning what? That we can pray wherever when it's time for salah, wherever we are. Now, before the previous nations, it wasn't like that. They can only pray in the temples. So the previous nations and the prophets, salah, prayer was in a specific place. It was in a temple. It was in a place of worship. There was only specific places designated. So from the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala making this deen complete and making it easy, and the message that would reach all of mankind and apply to every time and place, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed that in this time, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, salah can take place anywhere. Okay, and also as the scholar, wa tahura, and the entire earth is a means of purification. Tayammum was not something, as we mentioned, revealed to any previous nation. Okay, so salah being permissible everywhere and tayammum, these are specifics that were revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yeah, we're coming. Yeah, so وجعلت المسجد طهورا فأيما رجل من أمتي أدركته الصلاة فليصلي. So whichever person, rajul means man, but the word rajul can also mean individual or person. Any person from my ummah who the time of salah enters upon, then he should pray. Okay, meaning that the prayer has to be performed regardless, right? There is no excuse that allows you to miss prayer completely. except for very, small exceptions. However, in general, we have to pray. If there's no water, you make tayammum. If you can't make tayammum, you pray without tayammum, right? If tayammum is not possible, then you pray even without tayammum. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Salli qa'iman," pray standing. If you can't pray standing, فَقَاعِدًا, then sitting. And if you can't do that, فَعَلَى جَنْبٍ, then on your side, lying down. So the salah is always performed however a person is able to pray it. Okay. The fourth one is وَأُعْطِيتُ الشَّفَاعَةِ. The shafa'a, the Prophet ﷺ said, I was given the shafa'a. What is this? The shafa'a? Shafa'a means
The intercession that Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam will do on the Day of Judgment. Maqam Mahmud.
the
Hadith of
intercession.
Sahih Muslim.
Sahih. The intercession on the Day of Judgment. There's different types of intercession on the Day of Judgment, right? One of them is specific to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and the others will be given to different prophets and even people as well. What's the one that's specific to the Prophet ﷺ?
Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is that the narration that mentions in Sahih Muslim that he Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam will go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah will and then he will fall in sujood and then Allah will teach him a dua that nobody knows.
Sahih.
And then
It is
he will
called
ask dua.
الشفاعة العظمى.
Uthma, nah,
الشفاعة العظمى, the greater shafa'a.
the greater
It's
shafa'a.
the one that will cause judgment to begin, right? So judgment will not begin. The people will go from one prophet to another, asking them, go to Allah, ask him to start the judgment.
Nah.
Each prophet will decline to be the one that goes in front of Allah. I remember a sin, I remember a mistake, until they reach the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who will say, Ana laha, I am for it. And he will go and make sujood underneath the throne of Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will teach him a dua unknown to anybody before that time, and based on that, the judgment will begin. So this is ash-shafa'at al-uzma. There's other types of shafa'a. There's shafa'a for some that will enter Jannah without hisab. There will be an intercession for some people to enter Jannah without hisab and without adhab, without punishment and without standing for trial. The Prophet ﷺ will intercede for some people that were supposed to enter the hellfire not to enter, and they won't enter based on his intercession. For some people who in Jannah, for their ranks to be raised in Jannah. Okay, based on his intercession, your ranks will be raised to a higher level in Jannah. So there's different types of intercessions. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ will intercede for. That's a topic on its own. That there's a lot more that can be said on that topic. And the fifth one was وكان النبي يبعث إلى قومه خاصة وبعثت إلى الناس عامة. A prophet used to be sent for a specific nation of people, but I've been sent to all the people, to all of mankind. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about the Prophet, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. You have not been sent except for a mercy to all of mankind. And logically, it follows that if this is the last message sent by Allah, that it has to be for everybody. Otherwise, we're calling ourselves the chosen people. No, there is no concept of chosen people in Islam, where if you come from a certain lineage, like the Jews believe, right? If you come from this lineage, from Jacob through, this prophet and that prophet, and Jacob chose which of his sons the blessed lineage would go through, and the other one is, outside of the chosen people, he becomes a Gentile or whatever the case is. No, we don't have this in Islam. In Islam, a person who believes correctly, and then they will be rewarded based on their iman and their amal. The Prophet ﷺ used to come out and say to his own family, "O daughter of Muhammad, if you steal, your hand will be cut off." Okay? The Prophet ﷺ said, "There's no virtue for an Arab over a non-Arab, for a white over a black. There's no virtue except with taqwa." Okay, so we don't have this concept in Islam of chosen people. No, you're chosen based on the guidance that you follow. Now, and this is an indication of, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكُنْتُمْ خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ. You were the best of nations raised up for mankind if you do such and such and such. Right? So this message is for all of mankind. The work of da'wah continues with the believers, because there's no prophet to come. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called this nation, the best nation raised up for mankind. Naam. Was that the last narration in that chapter?
No.
Jamil. So we covered tayammum, inshallah, and a couple narrations here. Can we get through it? I think we can get through it quickly. A couple of narrations
Yeah, I think it's about emotions. Yeah, we can, I think.
نعم, on hayd or menstruation. نعم. جميل. Let's
باب
go.
نعم. باب الحيض. عن عائشة رضي الله عنها أن فاطمة بنت أبي حبيش سألت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقالت إني أستحاض فلا أطهر أفأدع الصلاة؟ قال لا، إن ذلك عرق، ولكن دعي الصلاة قدر الأيام التي كنت تحيضين فيها، ثم اغتسلي وصلي. وفي رواية وليست بالحيضة، فإذا أقبلت الحيضة واترك الصلاة فيها، فإذا ذهب قدرها فاغسلي عنك الدائم عنك
الدم.
الدام عنك الدام وصلي.
نعم,
نعم.
الدم وصل. نعم. عن عائشة. عائشة, she narrates that Fatima bint Abi Hubaysh, question, how about the people of Israel who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran that He preferred them over the rest of mankind? Nah, there was preference given to people as far as them receiving the message. Allah preferring them with certain, levels of, for example, understanding, or things of that nature. Yes, there's preference. There's preference. Allah preferred certain prophets over others, and things like that. Preference is there. However, that doesn't mean that if a person is of the chosen people, that he automatically achieves salvation and others don't achieve salvation, right? Or that they will remain preferred and better regardless of what they do. No, the end result is based on the iman and the amal. No. Okay, so in this hadith, سألت النبي, Fatima, she comes and she asks the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, فقالت إني أستحاض فلا أطهر. She says, I'm in a state of istihada, means there's constant bleeding and I don't become pure. Okay, so she had a situation where she would continue to bleed and not become pure. أفأدع الصلاة, should I leave the prayer altogether? Okay, so basically she wasn't seeing the end of menstruation. She was bleeding all the time. So she says, do I just not pray at all? قال لا, إن ذلك عرق. The Prophet ﷺ said, no, this is a عرق, which means a vein. Means this bleeding is from a vein. It's not the blood of menstruation. ولكن دعي الصلاة قدر الأيام التي كنت تحيضين فيها. He said, rather leave the prayer for the number of days that you normally had your hayd, your period for. Okay, ثم اغتسلي وصلي, and then make ghusl and pray. In the other narration, وليست بالحيضة فإذا أقبلت الحيضة فاترك الصلاة فيها فإذا ذهب قدرها فاغسلي عنك الدم وصلي. نعم. In the other narration he adds, and purify yourself and pray. Okay, so we see, so the Prophet ﷺ said that he differentiated here between hayd and istihada. Hayd is menstrual blood, the period, and then there's istihada, which is discharge and light bleeding other than hayd. So other than hayd is the only part that a woman doesn't pray during that time, and anything other than that, she should still pray. She should make wudu for the prayers and pray. And we'll come to some of the details here. Okay. Okay, so this hadith proves that the ha'id, the woman, while she's menstruating, she leaves the salah altogether and she doesn't make up the prayers. Okay, so as Aisha mentions in another hadith, I think we might come to it, that during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we used to make up the fasting but not make up the prayers, right? Some of the scholars, they mentioned a wisdom here because salah continues to accumulate all the time. So it would become very difficult for a woman to have to make up the prayers from the days that she missed because of her period, because there's going to be new prayers every single day. So now she's going to be having to pray double prayers in a day. No. However, fasting is not all the time, so it makes sense that you can make up the days that you miss from fasting. So the days of fasting are made up. However, the salah that's missed during the menstruation is not made up. Okay? And here we see the Prophet ﷺ said, قَدْرُ الْأَيَّامِ الَّتِي كُنْتِ تَحِيضِينَ فِيهَا. So the first measure, if a woman is not able to distinguish between hayd and istihada, between what is actually the menstrual blood and what is something other than that, the first measure she should use is the number of days that she normally gets her period for. Okay? So if she has that kind of regular period, which most women do, then she should use that number of days. It's usually 7 days, it's usually 6 days, then she should go by that. Okay? That would apply to any woman who has a regular period. If it's irregular, then that's going to be something different. But if it's regular, then and she's not able to differentiate, is it hayd or is it just bleeding istihada that's not hayd, then she should go back to the number of days that she normally has. Okay? Also, the scholars mentioned that she should be sure that the hayd ended. So as Aisha mentions in another hadith, don't hasten. Okay, you always want to reach a certainty, right? So if a woman that's on her hayd, she shouldn't start praying until she's certain that the period has ended, right? If she's still unsure, she should wait until she's sure that it ended. Okay, so there's no need to hasten and worry about I might be missing salawat. No, rather the right thing to do is to wait until she's certain that it has ended and then start praying at that time. Okay. Also, the strongest view regarding the woman that's mustahaba and istihaba, who has some discharge or bleeding that's not menstrual, is that she doesn't need to repeat ghusl for every salah, that it's sufficient to make a wudu for every salah. Okay, now some of the scholars, they said she should make ghusl, but she can combine one ghusl for dhuhr and asr and another ghusl for maghrib and isha. Okay, so she would be making ghusl 3 times a day, once for fajr, once for dhuhr and asr, once for maghrib and isha. Okay, but the strongest view, Allahu alam, is that she just makes ghusl. She doesn't have to repeat the ghusl. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, ثُمَّ اغْتَسِلِي وَصَلِّي. Make ghusl and then pray. Okay, so he didn't mention repeating the ghusl for each prayer. He said, make ghusl and then pray after that. Right? Now, do you have a question?
Yeah, so quick question. So a man cannot approach a woman when she's in hayd, but can he approach if she's in the stage of istihada?
No, in the istihada, he can. Only during the hayd, he cannot. There's no sexual relations during hayd, but with istihada, it's permissible. Everything is permissible with istihada, just as she makes salah and everything other than that. Everything becomes permissible as usual. The only difference is that she's going to make wudu for each salah, just like somebody who has, some discharge or, what do you call it? Urinary continence. No? So same situation, you make wudu for each salah.
And same for tawaf al-wada, that she could perform it?
No, she can do all of the acts of worship, including salah and tawaf. If you're making salah, that means you can perform any act of worship. Okay, let's go on. Now, question?
Aisha, she said it's better to delay, don't rush, right? But after a certain point, you're trying to delay, but nothing comes out. So you have to do those between prayers. Let's say it's Zohar time, it's about to end. Until Isha, you want to delay and then do the ghusl. How about Asr and Maghrib? Nothing comes out.
Khalas, once she reaches that purity and there is no discharge whatsoever, then she should be praying from that time.
She said
she should no need to delay. No, delay if there's still some light discharge. If there's some light discharge that's connected to the hayd itself, meaning at the end of the period of the hayd, there's going to still be some light discharge because this is the end of the hayd, right? It would end with some type of white discharge or light discharge. So during that time, she should make sure that she has reached purity. Then, once she reaches that purity, she should make ghusl and pray. So once there is no discharge at all, but if there's still some light discharge connected to the time of the hayd, then she should wait. Yeah. Go ahead, Bismillah.
عن عائشة رضي الله عنها أن أم حبيبة استحيضت 7 سنين فسألت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن ذلك فأمرها أن تغتسل فقال هذا عرق قالت فكانت تغتسل لكل صلاة.
This is the narration why some of the scholars they take the view that she should make ghusl, okay, for each salah or combine between dhuhr and asr and combine for maghrib and isha. عن عائشة أن أم حبيبة استحيضت 7 سنين. She was in a state of istihada for 7 years. So she had a constant discharge for 7 years. Okay. فسألت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن ذلك. She asked the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم فأمرها أن تغتسل. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم ordered her to make ghusl. Okay, and he said هذا عرق. This is a vein. So it's not hayd, it's a vein. قالت فكانت تغتسل لكل صلاة. So she used to make ghusl for each salah. Now the difference in understanding here is what? The Prophet ﷺ said, he told her تغتسل. He just told her to make ghusl. The understanding that she took was she made ghusl for every salah. So this is where the difference comes in. Some of the scholars based on this, they said the ghusl for every prayer. Okay. However, the other scholars, they said, no, she did that, but that wasn't what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said specifically. Okay. He didn't order the ghusl to be repeated for every prayer. And if it had been wajib, he would have specified that. Okay. Okay, so the scholars, they differed. But again, the majority of the ulama of the Salaf, and this was the view of Ibn Abbas and Aisha and others amongst the Sahaba, was that she does not need to repeat the ghusl. So the majority of the ulama, including plenty from the Sahaba, they took the view that she does not need to repeat the ghusl. And for proof of this also, we have what's known as al-bara'atul asliya, meaning that without proof, we don't establish an act of worship without proof. So here we don't have clear proof. The Prophet ﷺ, he didn't say for every salah. So the default is that it's not for every salah. The ghusl is one time, and then she prays. No? Question? No, go ahead.
So one time for the two salah, right?
According to those, yeah. According to the ones that say she needs ghusl for every prayer, they said 3 ghusl a day. Fajr. But again, this is not the majority said no. Just she needs to make ghusl and then she makes wudu for every salah. That's the majority view. Yeah, the majority said just wudu for every salah, as long as she has discharge. Right? Anybody in a state of discharge, then they make wudu for every salah. Okay. If there's no discharge there, then the wudu remains until wudu is lost in a natural way. Yeah. On to the next hadith.
As for ghusl, it would be just after the end of the cycle of hayd, and then after that, no ghusl now.
Correct. Yeah, just one ghusl at the end.
نعم. عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت: كنت أغتسل أنا ورسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من إناء واحد كلانا جنب وكان يأمروني فأتزر فيباشروني وأنا حائض وكان يخرج رأسه إلي وهو معتكف فأغسله وأنا حائض. نعم.
جميل. عن عائشة رضي الله عنها, she says, Aisha narrates herself, قالت كنت أغتسل أنا ورسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من إناء واحد. Me and Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم, we used to take ghusl in one container, in one place. We used to make ghusl together. وكان يأمرني فأتزر, and he used to order me, or tell me to take izar, okay, to wear an izar. This is not part of the ghusl. This is outside of the ghusl. He would have me wear an izar. فيباشرني وأنا حائض, and he would still touch me when I was in a state of hayd. Now the reason one of the reasons this is pointed out here is because, again, of the previous nations and other religions, is that when a woman is in a state of hayd, when she's on her period, that they don't mix with the women at all. This exists until now, like in Judaism, for example. They don't mix with the women at all. I believe some of the other religions, the woman even has to sleep in a different place, and they don't sit together, and they don't eat together, and things like that. So here we get a clarification that the woman herself is not impure, right? The woman, she doesn't become impure herself because she's in a state of hayd. No, rather, there are certain things that she can't do during that time, just like a man in janaba. Okay, but she herself, she's not impure. Prophet ﷺ was with his wife. He spent time with his wife. He touched his wife. He just ordered her to wear an izar. Okay, so that clarifies that there's not the sexual relations. Okay, the full intimacy or intercourse doesn't take place during that time. نعم. فيباشرني وأنا حائض. So he would touch me. Okay, like touch me, the intimate touching, while I was حائض, while I was in hayd. وكان يخرج رأسه إلي. And he used to bring his head into her room وهو معتكف, while he was making i'tikaf in the masjid. So during Ramadan, while the Prophet Muhammad was making i'tikaf in the masjid, he would bring his head into Aisha's room, because her room was attached to the masjid, and فأغسله وأنا حائض, and I would wash his head or his hair for him. Okay, so again, that shows that the mixing and the interaction and everything like that was normal, and it shows that a person can, he stuck his head out of the masjid even when he was in i'tikaf. There is no problem. Some people are very, like extremely strict with the issue of i'tikaf. If you breathe outside of the masjid, you broke your i'tikaf. No, it's permissible to, according to the majority of ulama, it's permissible to go outside of the masjid if there's a need and you're still mu'takif. So if there's no food, you need to go buy food, for example, you're still in i'tikaf. If you need to do that, you can do any of those things based on necessity, okay, and still be in i'tikaf. And we learn from this hadith the permissibility of a man and wife taking ghusl together. There's no restriction against that in Islam. And the izar, the issue of izar, if a person was being intimate with his wife while she's in a state of hayd, the issue of the izar, her wearing like a covering, like a wrapping, an izar, is the scholars, they said it's preferred, it's mustahab, it's not wajib, it's not an obligation for her to do that. She said, I did that, right? The Prophet told me to do that, but it doesn't show that it's an obligation to actually do that, but it's probably maybe safer to do that, right? If someone was to approach his wife while she was menstruating, is there kafara or a fidya? Yes, there is a kafara or fidya. I think we're going to come to that. I believe there's a narration here. So let's read the next narration, and we'll come to that. This one. Next one. Go ahead.
نعم. عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت: كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يتكئ في حجري فيقرأ القرآن وأنا حائض.
نعم. Okay, so this narration here, we have. You read the narration of Mu'adha, right?
لا.
No. Sorry.
The small one. The one that reciting Quran while she was menstruating.
نعم. So عن عائشة قالت كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يتكئ في حجري. She said the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم used to lay down or lean in my lap في حجري فيقرأ القرآن, and he would recite Quran وأنا حائض, while I was menstruating. So again, the nearness and the touching and all of that was there, and there was no restriction against that. The hijri means my lap. He would lean into my lap, okay, and recite Quran. So it's permissible to recite Quran. It's permissible to be in their presence and all of that. There's no restriction against any of those things. Next narration.
نعم. أن معاذة قالت سألت عائشة رضي الله عنها فقلت ما بال الحائض تقضي الصوم ولا تقضي الصلاة فقالت أحرورية أنت فقلت لست بحرورية ولكني أسأل فقالت كان يصيبنا ذلك فنؤمر بقضاء الصوم ولا نؤمر بقضاء الصلاة. نعم.
نعم. Okay, so it says here عن معاذ قالت سألت عائشة, she asked عائشة فقالت ما بال الحائض تقضي الصوم. She said, why does a menstruating woman make up the fasting ولا تقضي الصلاة, but she doesn't make up the salah? So Aisha responded to her, أحرورية أنت? Are you from Haruri? Okay, or Harurat is the name of the place, Harurat. Are you from this place, Harurat? Now, Harurat is a place in Kufa, and that's where the beginning of the Khawarij started, right? So it's as if those people were already, somewhat rebellious, right, from that time. So she's asking her, what kind of a question is this? Are you questioning, why we do this and why we don't do that? However, the woman clarified, فقالت لست بحرورية. No, I am not. I'm just asking. ولكني أسأل. I just want to know. فقالت كان يصيبنا ذلك فنؤمر بقضاء الصوم. So Aisha told her, when this happened to us, meaning at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we were ordered to make up the fasting, and we were not ordered to make up the salah. Okay, so simply, this is what we were ordered to do during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Okay, yeah, one يعني فائدة here is that when a companion says كنا نؤمر, we were ordered, this is the same as them saying what? It's the same, it takes the same ruling as them saying قال رسول الله. Yeah, it's the same thing. So if a companion says we used to be ordered with such and such, this is something that the usuliyun will look at, the people who study usul. They're going to look and say, so because normally if a companion says do this and that, okay, but they don't say قال رسول الله, then now this becomes mawquf. This becomes, the statement is coming only from the companion. It's not marfu'. It's not elevated to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. But when they make this statement, we used to be ordered, that means we used to be ordered by Rasulullah ﷺ. So it takes the same ruling as the marfu', as that which comes directly from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Okay, so look at the detail, how the scholars, they looked at with such detail at what kind of wording is used in the narration to establish a ruling. Okay, so these are things that are studied like an usul and things like that. Okay, so real briefly here, as this brings us to the end of the chapter on hayd, a couple of notes. So first of all, I think the most questions that come up regarding menstruation is knowing when it ends, okay? Like the confusion of whether it ended or not. So basically the scholars, they said, number one way, of course, to know is the bleeding stops, right? So that's the number one way that you know that the hayd has ended and she should make ghusl and start making salah. Either the bleeding stops completely or there's like a white discharge that comes this from the womb. Because the hayd itself, the blood of hayd, is that which the body of the woman would use as nourishment when she becomes pregnant, okay, or she's breastfeeding. It comes from the same, right? It comes from the womb and the nourishment that the body of the woman makes by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that white discharge that comes from the womb signifies the end of the hayd. Okay, now they used to come to Aisha and they would still have some yellowish or brownish type of discharge, and she would say, don't pray, okay? Don't hasten to prayer. Wait until you see that it's over, until you're sure that it's over. So the ulama, they said that the yellowish or brownish discharge, if it's attached to the time of the hayd, if it's happening towards the end of the hayd before it actually before there's any period of purity, then it's counted as part of the hayd. But the yellowish or brownish discharge, if it happens outside of the time of hayd, like sometime during the month when she's not on her period, then it doesn't count as menstruation, and she should make wudu for each salah and pray. Okay. If unsure, if there's irregular bleeding and whatnot, then the first priority is to try to base it on the previous the previous months. If she has a normal cycle, 6 or 7 or 8 days or whatever it is, then base it on that. Once that many days passes, make ghusl and pray. And the majority of the ulama, they limit the majority of the ulama, they put the top limit at 15 days. Say the maximum is 15 days. Okay, that's the view of the majority. Jamil? No. Anything else? Okay. Any other questions? Oh, the brother asked about, is there a kafara? Naam, there is a kafara. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, let him give a dinar. Let him give a dinar or half of a dinar in charity. Okay. And the dinar is it's a certain amount of gold, which is something like 4 grams. I have to confirm. I believe it's like 4 grams of gold. We can confirm the amount exactly, but a dinar was 4 grams of gold. Okay, so the Prophet said, let him give a dinar or half of a dinar in charity as an expiation for having done that.
Yeah, it's
So
4.25 grams.
How much?
4.25 grams, it says.
4.25. Okay, so 4.25 grams. So if we said then the minimum is half of that, then you're talking about 2 1/8 grams, right? 2 1/8 gram of gold. Okay, and then and obviously have the intention not to do that again, right? So the person has to basically make tawbah and intend not to make that kind of mistake, and he gives that amount, 2 1/8 gram minimum of gold in charity as an expiation. Jamil, their question: what about irregular? What about the irregular? Yasin.
Irregular periods. I think you answered that.
Oh, was that? I think he
Irregular
was
period.
asking right now. Did you any clarification regarding to the irregularity? Is it permissible to lay down while reading Quran? Yes, it's permissible to lay down while reading Quran. There is no restriction on reading Quran while laying down or anything like that. Okay, irregular periods. Then the woman, she should try to the best of her abilities to distinguish between the discharge that is menstruation and that which isn't. Okay, because there are signs as well, and the hayd, the menstrual discharge, is heavier, it's thicker, it's darker in color, it has a particular smell that the women, I'm sure, know. Okay, whereas istihada is a lighter discharge, it's a lighter bleeding that's lighter in color, not as thick. Okay, so she should try to differentiate between them. Okay, if she can't differentiate between them, then she goes back to the normal time that she was having when she had a regular period, if she's able to do that. Okay, and again, if it's when she knows she's on her period, then she should wait until she's sure of purity before she starts making salah. She should wait until she's sure of purity. And then again, one important thing here is that there's no fault on a woman who makes a mistake in this situation. She's trying to do her best. She's trying to differentiate. Sometimes it could become difficult, especially when it's irregular. So she's making her effort, then there's no fault upon her if she was mistaken one way or another. There's no fault upon her. One other issue that comes up sometimes is that If the period begins after the time a prayer began, so let's say, for example, Dhuhr entered at 12 o'clock at noon time, and she hadn't prayed Dhuhr yet, and then she notices that her period started, say, at 1 p.m., okay, or 1:30. Because Dhuhr entered while she was still in purity, she has to make up that Dhuhr, okay? Because that Dhuhr became wajib upon her, because she was in a state of purity when the time entered. So when she reaches purity again, she should make up that salah that was missed, okay? And similarly at the end, when the period ends, then the time that it ended, if she's able to distinguish the time that it ended, that particular prayer is wajib upon her. So if the period ended before Maghrib came in, then Asr is wajib upon her, even if it took her until Maghrib entered to make ghusl and be ready for Salah. She still has to make that Asr because she became pure during that time. So those are important issues to keep in mind because not everybody knows that. Same ruling for istihada as it is for hayd regarding spousal relations? No, it's not the same ruling. During istihada, it's permissible to have spousal relations. Spousal relations are permissible during istihada, but they're not permissible during hayd. Clear? So they're permissible if there's some type of discharge that's not the period, the menstrual period, okay? But during the menstrual period, they're not permissible. Hope that's clear. So that gets us through the sensitive subjects, inshallah. The next class, we start with the chapter on salah. Forgive us, of course, the sensitive topics are necessary to talk about and to learn. And of course, it's, maybe feels strange sometimes talking about these issues, but this is from our deen, and we learn them and teach them and share the information to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala correctly. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. We'll pick up from there inshallah on Friday.
Inshallah.
جزاكم الله خير. بارك الله فيكم.
وفيك بارك الله.